on this edition of the program. Debate Prep on Vance and Walz, plus Jeff Maurer on why everybody needs to be funny in politics now. So coming up.
The following is brought to you by AB Puppy, Just Another Pilot, and Daily Tech News Show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Politics program for September 27th, 2024. Your old pal, Justin Robert Young, joining you here from Austin, Texas. We got a great show here for you today to take you into the weekend. I'm going to tell you this. You guys know that I love doing debate prep. I love going through old debates. I might be the only human on earth who has ever said that phrase, but picking up on some of the mechanics of the combatants. It looks like the last debate we're going to get in this cycle is Tim Walz versus J.D. Vance. So top line here, I don't know that this debate matters one lick. I don't think that it does. However, it does have the unique distinction of being the last debate that we're going to get in the cycle. Normally, it's first presidential debate, VP debate, and then two presidential debates, or sometimes it's two presidential debates, a VP debate. But if you remember back to 2012, Mitt Romney hands Barack Obama a loss in their first debate together, and then it is Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. talking about a bunch of stuff, and you're Jack Kennedy now. He's very much takes the reins, seemingly takes the momentum back from Romney Ryan, and they never really look back. Now, whether or not that narrative is true is up to you, but still, that's the way it was discussed. The big question here is, what do you think about J.D. Vance and what do you think about Tim Walz? Right now, Tim Walz is, by approval rating, the most popular person of the four that are on the ticket. The least popular person is J.D. Vance. However, I got to tell you, after reviewing one debate each, both of them happened in 2022, so it's not like ancient tape. J.D. Vance has only had one debate. Tim Walz had two that were televised in his re-election campaign most recently. I think that we're going to have an interesting contest. Let's go ahead and start with Vance. This was his debut. First time he has ever had any kind of structured debate like this against Tim Ryan, somebody that has been in politics for 20 years. And to bring you into this race, J.D. Vance barely wins the Republican primary. Longtime listeners will remember that we were out there in Ohio seeing events with Josh Mandel and J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance eventually gets the Trump endorsement, but he kind of squeaks by. In public polling leading up to this debate, things were running within the margin of error. Now, I was never much of a believer in Tim Ryan, but there's a lot that kind of goes into this. Let's just go ahead and start the tape. So we're going to start here. This is an infographic that they put up at the beginning of the debate where they talk about the issues that were on the minds of voters in 2022. And when they put that up there, what's interesting to me is that they very much track to where we are right now. The one thing that has changed is immigration. Immigration is far and away a bigger issue now than it was but 2 years ago. This is Tim Ryan on the attack for J.D. Vance on abortion. And this is J.D. coming back. This is right at the top of this debate. Not a lot of wobbly knees for Vance with the bright lights on him.
Look, I've always believed in reasonable exceptions. This is a misrepresentation of my view, but let's hear it from me, not from Congressman Ryan. I absolutely think the 10-year-old girl, the case that we've, of course, heard a lot about, an incredibly tragic situation. I mean, look, I've got a 9-year-old baby girl at home. I cannot imagine what that's like for the girl, for her family. God forbid something like that would happen. I have said repeatedly on the record that I think that girl should be able to get an abortion if she and her family so choose to do so. But let's talk about that case. Because why was a 10-year-old girl raped in our community, raped in our state in the first place? The thing the media and Congressman Ryan, they talk about this all the time. The thing they never mentioned is that poor girl was raped by an illegal alien, somebody that should have never been in this state in the first place. You voted so many times against border wall funding, so many times for amnesty, Tim. If you had done your job, she would have never been raped in the first place. Do your job on border security. Don't lecture me about opinions I don't actually have.
So again, Vance knows he's going to lose on abortion. He turns it around, talks about this famous case that was very, very well talked about at the time of a woman that had to leave Ohio, go to Indiana for an abortion. She had been raped. Vance moderating what is being portrayed by Ryan as extraordinarily extreme views. He does a pretty good job on it and then turns it around and says this is really about illegal immigration. Remember, in debates, there are offense and there are defense. You're not going to get around whether or not you are either trying to punish your opponent or trying to limit the punishment that is being put on you. That is all about public opinion, and you know where your vulnerabilities are. So Vance does a good job turning this around. Ryan isn't able to put it back on him, and that's early. That's early. One more time. The theme of this debate was Vance being able to position himself as an outsider. This was a call for change. The Trump coaching tree, as it were, those that are blessed of Trump, they are running as anti-establishment outsiders. Vance, to this day, might be the only one of those that was able to win in anything close to a purple state. No for Dr. Oz. No for Herschel Walker. No for Blake Masters. But here we go. This is J.D. Vance, I think very capably, putting the screws to Tim Ryan when Tim Ryan's going after him from the right as being an out-of-touch vulture capitalist.
Yeah. The problem is, and you know why we lose jobs like that? Because guys like you, J.D., make money off of investing in China. He, in his first venture capital fund investments, you invested into China. And you have the
Which
audacity,
that, Tim?
you have the one that ships jobs from China to manufacture things that go to, like, I don't know if it's Vail or some kind of ski resort or something like
so
that.
Your consultants gave you this line and you don't actually know it.
I'm telling you, J.D., you've not denied investing into China. And you're talking about illegal immigrants. He has businesses in Ohio that actually hire foreign workers. You think we're stupid, J.D., and we're not. I'm just telling you that you're from Silicon Valley. You don't understand what's going on here in Ohio. You invest into China. You hire foreign workers, and you are funded by a Silicon Valley billionaire. He gave you $15 million, funded your primary. Mitch McConnell is giving you $40 million, all corporate money from the corporations who ship jobs overseas. Now you want to parachute into Ohio, and you want to try to buy a Senate seat. It's not going to work, because everybody can sniff it out that all you want to do is be senator.
And Tim, how many tens of millions of dollars have you gotten from Apple, from Google, from the companies that have shipped a lot of jobs to China? You can't even name the company that I allegedly invested in that ships jobs to China. It's a total. No.
Did you invest in China?
Which company did I invest in China?
I'm asking you, did you?
Not that I know of. I have no idea what you're talking about, Tim.
You're going to do just
fine. Well, I'm sure
fine.
our fact checkers will determine
Please
that.
do.
By the way, the first topics in this debate are as follows: inflation, abortion, mean things that are said about each other, and Ukraine. It would not be shocking if those four were the top four subjects that were brought up in this debate on Tuesday. I think that there's a lot. In fact, of the two, I believe that this debate tracks closer to what we're probably going to see on Tuesday than the Walz debate was. Now, part of that is because this is for a federal office, so you're talking more federal issues, and the one that we're about to go over with Walz, that's more local. But still, it's interesting how close Tim Ryan's campaign tracks to where Harris and Walz want to be right now. Let's go to another Vance outsider position. This is something I do believe you will probably see almost verbatim next week. Vance trying to be very specific on policy, getting blistered by Ryan for meta issues, and then pointing out, talking directly to the audience about the contradiction.
He called rape inconvenient. He said he denied it, but it's on tape, right? Now he says he's not for same-sex marriage. He's going right down the line with the absolute most extremists, the guys who want to ban books and everything else. Those are the guys you bring into the state to campaign for you, JD. These are extreme positions that Ohioans are rejecting.
Well, I want to just point out something about what Tim
Very
Ryan...
quickly, sir.
Yes, Colleen. Thank you. I want to point out something that Tim Ryan just did. One, I answered the question about same-sex marriage, and I identified very specifically a couple of problems with the legislation. Tim didn't address that. He just pretended that it didn't exist. Because here's the problem with Tim Ryan. He spent 20 years in Washington, D.C. He actually doesn't care about the details of public policy, and I'm sure he didn't even read the bill that he voted on. What he does is he reads the canned lines that his consultants give him. You could respond to the argument that I made, Tim. Instead, you decided to pretend, again, that I have views I don't actually hold, so you can't... Look, it's insulting. Voters deserve somebody who actually respects their views and speaks honestly to them about the issues. That's not what Tim's doing tonight.
All right, now let me go back to what I was talking about before. This is going to be very similar to how Walz is going to go after J.D. Vance. Listen to this clip from Tim Ryan about the government needing to get out of your way, that Republicans are the party of restricting freedoms.
Yeah, I will have a litmus test. I will have a litmus test on Roe v. Wade. I'll have a litmus test on the same-sex marriage. I'll have a litmus test on birth control. We cannot keep going down this road of taking away rights. The Dobbs decision was the absolute first decision where the Supreme Court is taking rights away from people. It's not right. You know, we don't want doctors in our bedrooms. We don't want doctors politicians in our bedrooms and politicians in our doctors' offices. That's not what we want. And that's what this group of people who have taken over the Supreme Court and taken over state legislatures want. They want control. They want to control women. They want to tell you what kind of marriage you can have. They want to tell you whether or not you can use birth control. And look, the reality of it is we got to get the government out of a lot of these decisions and let the local governments make the school and the education decisions.
For the record, Tim Ryan 2022 is pro-border wall, pro-tariff on China. He wants to restore Roe. He wants to stop GOP extremists from taking away your freedoms. He is the Harris and Walz ticket. Now, I will leave it up to you, the listener, as to whether or not that is good. Now, messenger matters. I don't believe in Tim Ryan. I don't think that Tim Ryan is what some of the consultant class in D.C. thinks of him. They think of him as a real whisperer to the middle class. I think that he plays better to the coasts as a guy who looks like he should be speaking to middle America. I think that he proved in this race that he wasn't. Now, Ohio's a challenging state, but still, it was a midterm where a lot of Democrats did a lot better than they would have thought to do, and Tim Ryan didn't. Here's one place that Tim Ryan is saying things that Tim Walz will not say.
And Congressman Ryan, we're going to give you a chance to answer that, as well as our next question, which is that the Vice President Kamala Harris said just last month that the southern border is secure. So do you agree with her, and how do you respond to the accusations that just came from Mr. Vance?
Kamala Harris is absolutely wrong on that. It's not secure. We have a lot of work to do.
Kamala Harris is wrong on securing the border. If I were Bernie Moreno in his Senate race in Ohio right now, I'd be clipping that up, and I would be running it, because I assume that Tim Ryan is backing Sherrod Brown, and so you could say, here's what Tim Ryan has said. And again, and this is something that I'll probably wind up writing. I might have already written about it in the Free Political Newsletter, available at freepoliticalnewsletter.com. 5 days a week. I'm back till the end of the election. 5 weeks only. Come on, get on the newsletter train. Blue dogs are back. Oh, 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 oh. In the past, when it came to Democrats, they were eating the dogs. Everybody that leaned to the right, leaned to the center, had been run out of the party. They either went red, they went Republican, but they did not have a home in the Democratic Party. There were fewer and far between. If you look at where Sherrod Brown is running his race, John Tester is running his race, how Raphael Warnock won his race in 2022, how Harris and Walz are running their race. It's blue dog stuff. This is centrist Democrat stuff. There's only one reason why you get Bill Clinton up on stage, and that's if you want to be for all the dogs, like your Drake. Let's go to this clip here. Big character charge from Tim Ryan to J.D. Vance. I think this is another thing that you're going to see. Obviously, Tim Walz was the author of Weird. This J.D. Vance guy, weird. You're weird. You say weird things. You do weird things. This is Tim Ryan coming after J.D. Vance for, quote unquote, starting a fake nonprofit. I want you to see how Vance handles it. Part of this is preparation, but part of this is execution. Specifically, pay attention to how Vance does the ad libs. This is a Trump specialty of when somebody is going after you, you hit them in their dead spots of when they're talking, and it totally undercuts where they're going.
In fact, he brought in somebody from Purdue Pharma to be the spokesperson for the nonprofit. The same drug company, Big Pharma, the big drug company that had all the pill mills going, got everybody addicted. 1 million people died, JD. 1 million people died. And you started a nonprofit to try to take advantage of people in Ohio. And you know what? All you did with it was launch your political career. His campaign manager worked for that nonprofit. He ran a poll to check his own standing from that nonprofit. I'm not going to take a backseat to you or anybody else on fentanyl, drugs, or immigration or anything else. Somebody that would, what kind of man would start a fake nonprofit to try to deal with addiction and not spend any money on anybody?
None of this is true, of course. And here's the problem with what Tim Ryan said. It's shameful for you to attack me, given that my family was affected by this problem. I put $80,000 of my own money into that nonprofit organization, Tim, and it absolutely did help people. Now, here's the thing. If you're in Ohio and you've seen these ridiculous commercials that Tim Ryan runs telling dishonest truth, dishonest lies about my nonprofit organization, it's paid by pharmaceutical blood money, because the very same corporations that caused this poison to come into our country in the first place have funded your campaign to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. Why are the people who've gotten rich off the opioid epidemic funding Tim Ryan and attacking me? The answer is obvious, because this guy is the biggest fan of pharma, and he's the biggest fan of illegal pharma, which is the Mexican drug cartels that are bringing this poison into our country.
Here is a pre-scripted line that I think Vance does very well. One of the things that he is going to, I assume, try to do in the debate next week is highlight the fact that he is young. And for everything that is being discussed about, we're not going back, we're going to turn the page, the Harris and Walz campaign have done their best to say that they are both an outsider and an insider campaign. J.D. Vance, I do believe, through little subliminals like he's about to do here, he's going to remind people, I'm a young father. I am dealing with the issues that you, the growing family, are dealing with. Here he has a nice little pre-scripted line to slice at Tim Ryan about his kids.
So I've got 3 little kids, including a 2-year-old, and one of the things that's true of toddlers and is also apparently true of career politicians is that they accuse you of doing the very thing that they do themselves all the time. At the height, Tim, of the BLM riots, I've condemned political violence whether it comes from the left or the right, but at the height of the BLM riots, where they were rioting and looting and burning down America's cities, Ohio cities and small towns, Tim Ryan threw the police under the bus. He attacked them as the new Jim Crow, as systemically racist, and he voted for legislation that would have stripped funding from them and redirected it towards litigation defense. This is another example of Tim Ryan talking about what he would like to do. Tim, you don't sound too bad. If you actually tried to do the things you talk about wanting to do, you wouldn't be half bad. The problem is you got 20 years and you failed to do any of it.
All right, a clip. One of the things that you get in every vice presidential debate is defend your boss, defend your boss, defend your boss, defend your boss. That's usually about the biggest thing that happens in these kinds of contests. So we have a clip of how J.D. Vance defended Trump back in 2022. Here it is.
I mean, is there anything he's done that's concerned me? Why don't we let the criminal investigations actually play out? Because I was alive during 2016 to 2020, and what I saw was consistently rumors that finally Donald Trump was going to be indicted, that he was going to be accused of something legitimately criminal. Of course, Tim Ryan, despite his commercials, voted to impeach him twice. I have seen nothing that would suggest that the President of the United States should be thrown in prison. And most importantly here, if you're going to make accusations like this, the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, one of the most political actors in the history of American justice, if you want to go after a former president, a possible future president, or at least a future political candidate, you've got to tell the American people why. We have really corrupt leadership at the Department of Justice, and that's a problem.
At this stage in the debate, things are getting a little gamey. We're in the final 10 minutes, and so you can tell that Tim Ryan wants to get out certain lines that he knew he wanted to say during the debate. One of them came from Donald Trump making a joke that J.D. Vance kisses his ass, and so he gets out his line, much like J.D. Vance had his line about, I have toddlers, and this is what they do with projection. This is Tim Ryan's pre-written line. You need an ass kicker, not an ass kisser. Pay attention, though, to a very Chris Christie-esque rebuttal, the same kind of outsider stuff that Vance had been doing all debate.
I have been a pain in the rear end to Nancy Pelosi. And if Chuck Schumer's the leader, I will be a pain in the rear end to him, too. I'm for Ohio. I don't kiss anyone's ass like him. Ohio needs an ass kicker, not an ass kisser.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Another
well-rehearsed line.
Another one for you here.
One more clip from this debate. Very late in the process, last 10 minutes, Tim Ryan starts getting a little heated. Tim Ryan's a bit of a hothead. And if you are not watching us on YouTube and you're only listening to us, what you have to know is that the body posture of Tim Ryan starts to get a little bit gamey, and he's like grabbing the front of the podium. I don't think he had great body posture in general. Again, I don't really believe in Tim Ryan. I don't think that he reads as authentic. I think he had his eyes down the entire time. He did not project confidence. He didn't look like the veteran on stage. J.D. Vance looked like the veteran on stage for this entire debate. But this is Tim Ryan getting heated, and I'll tell you why that's important after.
I'm not going to apologize for spending 20 years of my adult life slogging away to try to help one of the hardest economically hit regions of Ohio and dedicated my life to help that region come back. You got to be ashamed of yourself, J.D. You went off to California, you were drinking wine and eating cheese, and you said, I don't even feel comfortable in Ohio anymore.
Gentlemen,
I'm not going to sit here and let you demean my service that I learned from my family. That when I went to Catholic school, we had to spend time going to help people. It was called senior service. I had to put on my football jersey and go serve in the community. This is an extension of that.
I admire the spirit of service.
No,
what I don't admire is the failure of accomplishment. Look at how Youngstown has done during your leadership. That's what I don't admire.
Tim Ryan getting heated is important because Tim Walz is a hothead. The way that you make Tim Walz have a bad night is by getting Tim Walz to be frustrated. Tim Walz, as you're about to see, is somebody who's an extraordinarily capable debater. But he's under two big restrictions. Number one, he has been picked apart more in this race than he was apparently in either of his two gubernatorial races, and certainly in his runs for the House. This is the big, big, big bright lights. And in a state that is nominally purple, but pretty much blue, and has tilted more blue, he was able to get away with things. The press wasn't going to blister him in the same kind of way, and outside of Republican Facebook groups in Minnesota, not a lot's going to stick in the mainstream. It has now. He's had the conversation about his military service, about the IVF stuff. He was asked about it in his first interview on CNN, where he said, my grammar isn't the best. J.D. Vance has been hammering Tim Walz on this for weeks. He is going to hammer him again on television. What you want is Tim Walz getting flustered. And you might get there because the other big restriction is that Tim Walz isn't his own man. Tim Walz is a cog in the Kamala Harris machine. And they are not a machine that tolerates getting off script. They are a very rigid, message-controlled machine. And I don't know if that suits Tim Walz's playbook. And we're going to hear about that right now. Let's begin. This is October 18th, 2022. Oh, real quick, last thing on J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance wins that Senate race by 7 points. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that that was an anemic performance. That was an awful performance. And the comparison is that Mike DeWine won by a ridiculous amount. I don't know if I buy that. J.D. Vance had zero name ID. J.D. Vance came from out of nowhere. I think that the next time J.D. Vance runs for re-election in Ohio, if he loses in this race, he'll probably win by more if the statewide margins stay where they are. I don't think a 6 or 7 point win is a bad thing. And by the way, neither does Tim Walz, who also won by 7% in his race against Scott Jensen. Let's go ahead and get to that tape. My first thought, even right off rip, shout out to What's the Dirt. Get back on YouTube. Right off the rip, Tim Walz is very charismatic. He can barrel into any question, and you can tell that his preparation is really, really there. But he's verbose. I wonder how much he's going to be constrained in this campaign system. If Tim Walz was at the top of the ticket, I wouldn't worry about it at all. But when Tim Walz is spitting out something on CNN like, well, you know, my grammar isn't good, that's not the guy that you're about to hear. And here's the start of it. This is Tim Walz on abortion after his opponent, Jensen, pre-butts that abortion isn't on the ballot. As governor, he could not touch it. It's a very strong and forceful answer. Take a listen.
Well, there's a clear contrast here. My entire career, I've trusted women to make their health care decisions. I don't believe anybody who sits in this office should come between them. Scott was very clear in May. He mocked me and said, no kidding, Sherlock, I'm running for governor to get things done. We're going to ban abortion. That's not news. That changed after Roe versus Wade. And I think what most of us know, again, you heard this go to many different places. This is not about trusting women. It's not about holding clear convictions. It's about changing your positions as the winds blow. This is about life and death. This is about providers making the most personal decisions with a woman with nobody else in between them. I've made it very clear in every single thing I've done. I didn't have to practice 40 years of medicine to change the positions on women's health care in the final weeks once we saw how unpopular this was. So what I'd speak to Minnesotans on this, being governor means making hard decisions. It doesn't mean you're always going to get them right, but it means trusting Minnesotans. So let's just be very clear. The governors appoint Supreme Court justices who interpret cases and come in front of them. We heard Supreme Court justices go in front of the United States Senate and claim that there was no way Roe versus Wade would change because it was settled law. Well, Fool us once. It's not going to happen here in Minnesota. I just want to be absolutely clear. This is on the ballot. It will impact generations to come, and I have been absolutely clear from the beginning of this. Not on our watch. I trust women. I trust them to make their own health care decisions.
And now let's get to Walz the jackhammer. You want to see Walz on the offensive? How about him calling his opponent, a doctor, a pill pusher?
Minnesota was one of the states that sued the manufacturers who were making this. This opioid pandemic started, and some of you have seen the shows, you've seen the documentaries that have been done on this, that they started pushing these things for profit and ended up spreading into our communities. That's where most of this has come from. And I have to say, I want to be very clear about this. They didn't do it alone. When Scott was issuing opioid prescriptions, he issued more than 94% of his peers. He did that at the same time while accepting meals from the manufacturers and the pharmaceutical companies, whining and dining on expensive meals. And then he did an expose that was in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that was entitled Confessions of a Prescription Drug Pusher, where Scott acknowledged that their impact on him and marketing impacted his prescribing of those. It's getting at the front end of this. It's understanding why it got it out there. It's doing what the state of Minnesota did, suing, and then putting in processes to both capture the opioids before they get there and working with folks who are in recovery. Minnesota can do that.
Now, one of the things that it doesn't really make sense for us to go through every single clip here, so I'm just going to have to summarize it for you, is that Jensen is not a particularly charismatic person. I don't know how he plays the Minnesotans, but obviously it was about 7 points worse than Tim Walz, or probably maybe a little bit less than that if you add in the incumbent effect. But still, he wasn't lighting the world on fire. He did better than Walz's opponent did against him the first time that Walz got elected, which shows that Minnesota's probably less thrilled with Walz this time around. But still, he's not great. And still, he starts really blistering Walz for a few things. There was a huge COVID food program that was, at least at this point, the largest COVID fraud that we had seen. That was under Walz's watch, and he hits him on school lockdown. What Walz does here is very disciplined. He does not respond. He does not take the bait. He lets the other person say what they are going to say, and he keeps a stone face.
And I don't think Tim Walz has been an advocate of tightening up the southern border. He's been loose on that, if you will. But I also think that it's interesting to me that he's willing to go out and sue drug companies, which I'm okay with, but he's not willing to go out and take action like that when we're losing $250 million in the Feeding Our Future fraud. In this situation, we had a clear situation where Governor Walz learned of the fact that there was fraud going on. We still can't pin him down as to whether it was April or the summer or November, but the fact is he broke the law by not advising the Office of the Legislative Auditor that there was likely fraud going on.
I assume this is going to be the playbook on Tuesday when Vance goes after him for lying about the IVF stuff and for misrepresenting his military service. I think we are going to see that kind of perspective. This is how Walz eventually responds.
It isn't going to help us when we see the governor get behind Ilhan Omar when she comes out and says the police are a cancer and need to be dismantled and defunded. And a few weeks later, Tim Walz is telling Minnesota, this is the woman that we have to send to Washington, D.C. to represent us. We need to make certain that imprisoning people is a deterrent for violent felons. We absolutely need to have mandated minimum sentences, and without question, the laws have to be enforced. We can do so much better, but if we think that we can cherry pick just the schools and make them safe when everything else runs amok, we're kidding ourselves.
All right, thank you, Dr. Jensen. Governor Walz, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, we've seen this in being a teacher and having a sophomore in high school. This doesn't happen in other countries. And this plague of violence we see, and I will make the case that these school shootings of children who can't even be identified because of the damage that's been done by these shooters that end in their schools, there's things that we can do. One of the first things we can do is making sure, and every one of my budgets did increase the opportunity for public safety. We had a $450 million budget this year that was killed in the legislature when Scott told the Republican legislator to step away from that. That's money that we increased in LGA to allow for more. But it's much more than that. We have guns on the streets that were meant for war. We have the opportunity to do smart things, whether it be background checks or making sure we have red flag laws. In many of these cases, once we go back and deconstruct this, the easy access to these firearms is one of the problems. We see that in our streets today. A shooting at the Truck Park restaurant in St. Paul, the person who ended up with 2 of the guns there got them through a straw buyer who bought 90 of them in the month prior. So we have to have a conversation about guns. We have to have a conversation about fully funding our local police to get there. We need to make sure that we're doing all we can to understand that if you use a gun in a crime, it's going to be a heavy cost to it. But we need to move back upstream in the prevention of that. One, of making sure that those guns aren't on the streets, making sure we have smart policies in place.
For those that are only listening to this, I'll just describe Tim Walz's body posture. Very good. He's got a smile. He's obviously a stocky man. That's what you call fat people you like. And he's got his hands over his belly in a very pleasing way. Obviously, Tim Walz can be a big cartoon character of a man. You love to see him. He's got a big smile. He's got an infectious enthusiasm. But in this case, he does not skimp on having a strong posture. I think that's good. Again, I think this is going to be a good debate. Here's something that might get brought up. In fact, when we make our bingo board, I might throw this on. Twin metal mining is something that was about to go through in northern Minnesota under the Trump administration. It was then rejected by the Biden administration. This is the question of whether or not, if a future administration said that it was back on, would you stand in the way?
This is just wrong. Can you imagine how you would feel if you had this government politician come from hundreds of miles away and tell you, you don't get to do this. The way you grew up, you don't get to do this. The job you want, you don't get to do this. Because that's what's happening. We should absolutely let miners mine.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen. Governor Walz, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, first of all, a week and a half ago, I was in Keewatin with the president of U.S. Steel and the steel workers as we made the largest investment in mining in northern Minnesota in decades at the Keetac mine. We continue to make sure that we're following the science, following the law, and following the process. The idea that we just get out of the way, thank goodness I saw a bald eagle today. I'm glad the government was there to make that decision that we could work together. And I can tell you, this idea that teachers or that farmers or that miners don't want to do things right and they just want people out of the way is simply ridiculous. We know that we set standards to make sure that we keep those, and we've done that in northern Minnesota. I've been very clear on all these processes. We will follow the science, we will follow the law, and we will do that in a manner that makes sure that we're able to do them safely and able to produce what we're going to produce. We followed that process in one of the largest construction projects in northern Minnesota, and we know that there's a trade-off, and you have to be careful with environmental standards, but you can create these jobs. So this idea is simply, you're hearing it a lot tonight, what's not happening are complaints rather than real solutions. Watching spades go in the ground up there and watching the Keetac mine now be solid again, making sure that those hundreds of jobs stay there. That's what our administration has done.
All right, a few quick clips. Again, just because I'm watching this in the context of where we are right now. Here is Jensen talking about how much Tim Walz has hooked himself to the current administration.
But here's the rub. We're not seeing mining take place because Tim Walz has hooked his wagon to Joe Biden. And I guess with Kamala Harris coming to town on Saturday, he's hooked his wagon to her as well.
Tim Walz mentions here, and this is his strength, right? He can be folksy. He has to walk a line of, I am not complicit with lunatic environmentalists. I am here for you, the red areas of Minnesota. And so and this is like a Joe Biden special, actually, where he's been able to present himself throughout his career as a centrist with these folksy kind of ways where he's like, I'm not talking about taking a gun away. I'm like, come on, be serious. I'm talking about these weapons of war, blah, 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 right? You want to identify with the center and then carve out exactly what you are against, as opposed to having your opposition to one thing be painted as an opposition to everything. This is Tim Walz talking about how he is not against the farmers and the miners, and neither are all government regulations. And he has this funny quote.
The idea that we just get out of the way. Thank goodness I saw a bald eagle today. I'm glad the government was there to make that decision that we could work together. And I can tell you, this idea that teachers or that farmers or that miners don't want to do things right and they just want people out of the way is simply ridiculous.
It is damn near 40 minutes in to this debate when something that I am positive will come up during the debate that'll happen on Tuesday, and that is the, I believe it's Food First, but it was a gigantic COVID program that wound up having like $250 million in fraud. Jensen wants to throw it on Tim Walz's doorstep and make him own it. This is the back and forth.
The largest known COVID-19 fraud scheme in the nation was recently discovered here in Minnesota. Close to 50 people are facing charges for allegedly misusing $250 million in funds meant to feed children during the pandemic. My question is, what role do you feel the governor's office plays in this situation, and what steps would you take to make sure something like this doesn't happen again? We begin with Dr. Jensen.
Honestly, I think the governor's office was lazy. There were signs right out of the blocks. In fact, Governor Walz said that he was made aware of the situation in April of 2020, but then his office called the news reporter back and said, well, no, it was the summer, he misspoke. And then they called back and said it was November. But it doesn't matter when it was. The fact is the governor had every right to believe that fraud may be taking place with this Feeding Our Futures $250 million. At that point in time, according to state law, he has a responsibility to notify the Office of the Legislative Auditor. He never did that.
Yeah, all of us can agree that fraud is unacceptable. It's in the public sector or the private sector. I know when we first came to office, we had the MNLARS system, some of you remember. Not fraud, but it was about $100 million of an ineffective system. We worked together bipartisanly to put that in place. We've also implemented those in many of the agencies. We've had many audits by the Office of Legislative Auditor, unprecedented audit of the governor's office just this year, released in September, as well as the Department of Health. During COVID, the federal government relaxed some of their rules, and they sent out, as they should have, aid to states in the terms of unprecedented numbers. Now, making sure those safeguards are in place, absolute priority. Once the Minnesota Department of Education found this, they alerted the FBI. Now, it's an ongoing investigation. I guess we'll get more clarity once they start to come to that. But I think one of the things that's important here, and I will note, to our hundreds of school districts and to our hundreds of honest providers, you provided food to children at a critical time in a pandemic when there were those putting out false information, internet myths, ivermectin, whatever you have. This was a life and death situation, and food security was a top priority. The vast majority of those delivered and did an incredible job, where Minnesota was ranked as the state with the most security in children's food security. So no one agrees with the fraud. We'll make sure that these people have already pled guilty. They're going to jail. They'll continue to do the investigation. We will continue to put things in place as they've already done at the federal level, rolling and putting back in some of those safeguards.
The other big negative, and this is something you will almost assuredly hear on Tuesday, is Tim Walz's handling of the George Floyd riots, specifically in Minnesota, whether or not he did a good job. This is how he has answered it in the past. I assume he's going to give a pretty similar answer on Tuesday.
That's not what being governor is. It's making the hard decision at the time. The murder of George Floyd shocked not just Minnesota nor the nation. It shocked the world. And the civil unrest that ensued from that was probably some of the greatest that we've seen both in this nation and globally. And that operation, involving dozens of local, county, and then the state, involving multiple states in the region, and involving the federal government, had to be assembled, had to be coordinated, and had to make sure that we brought order back. I'll be the first to tell you, that's terrifying for Minnesotans in those days. Nothing like this had been seen before at the level of violence after the murder of George Floyd. I think, again, there'll be stories written, and this will be written about for quite some time. I'm proud of Minnesota's response. I'm proud of Minnesota's first responders who were out there, from firefighters to police to the National Guard to citizens that were out there. When we got done with this, and President Trump's Secretary of Defense Espers wrote a book He was on the phone many times communicating with public safety folks here, making the case. His assessment of this is that Minnesota had to write the book on this. They had to build the plane while they're flying it, and it was the model that needs to be used for every state. What I can tell you came out of that is there have been several occasions from Derek Chauvin's trial to the murder of Daunte Wright where the potential for this to happen again was there. It did not because of the lessons learned and the ability to mobilize.
Thank you, Governor.
So I wasn't in love with these answers, mostly because when Tim Walz is on his heels, he has a tendency to filibuster, and that's not terrible. I wouldn't say that it's bad. It's just kind of neutral. You're just not doing a great job of either totally reframing the question and getting it to some other place that you don't want to be, but you're not doing yourself any tremendous damage. The biggest problem is that it kind of separates him from his tell it like it is situation where, you know, some politicians are good at owning a little bit of failure because it gives them authenticity so they can take a larger bit of credit. Tim Walz is not one of those dudes. He is a I have done nothing wrong kind of guy. Trump is like that. A lot of politicians fall into it. You have to be a very special kind of a politician to be able to at least even project that, like, well, you know, I wanted to do this, couldn't do that. So anyway, he's not at his best there. And the goal for JD Vance is going to be to put him in as many of those positions as possible. One last thing. This is something we'll leave on a high note for Tim Walz. One of the great rhetorical tricks that he can pull is if he's taking a lot of incoming, deflect it. This is an absolute Trump special. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you. I'm just in the way. This is Tim Walz saying it with different words.
I have stood with the National Guard for 24 years. I'm proud of that work, that expertise that I brings to it. No matter how much I slandered by Scott, it doesn't change the fact to me. I don't care what he says about me. I care what he says about the folks who are out there doing this work, that put a plan together to deal with an unprecedented situation, to restore order.
So, what have we learned with these clips? Well, I see a lot of offense. A lot of offense. I would give Tim Walz probably the advantage there. I think that Tim Walz is going to be funnier. I think Tim Walz is going to be more magnetic. I think Tim Walz is going to be more charismatic. I think that the Tim Walz quotables are probably going to be something that you will see circulated. JD Vance is a tremendously proficient mechanical debater. Something that we talked about in our Kamala Harris debate prep was that she still isn't good at giving the short answer and then going off on the point that she wants to talk about. JD Vance is almost impeccable with it. In almost every single one of those answers, he's able to say, you know, are you for Lindsey Graham's thing? And he either answers it really quick or says, I'm going to talk about this real quick. I will get right back to Lindsey Graham's thing. So it doesn't sound like he's trying to snow you. He is giving you a little table of contents and then reading the rest of the chapters to you. I would say JD Vance is better on defense. And what we don't know is how good Tim Walz is in space once things break down. JD Vance is going to do his best to push him into it. Will Tim Walz be able to continue to hit JD Vance or keep his powder dry so he doesn't either get angry, get upset, or come off as a little unhinged? That's going to be the big question. Vance's win condition, and again, none of this matters. I don't think anyone's voting on this debate. But if there is a win condition, Vance's win condition is getting Tim Walz flustered. There have been times in the past where he has gotten pissy and it doesn't come off well. It'll come off well to Democratic partisans. I don't think it'll come off well to independents. Walz's win condition is making JD Vance look either too pedantic or too weaselly. That's going to be the big key. And there's your debate prep for a VP debate. Who would have thought? This is your update brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you need to head if you want to support the show. I love you guys. I love you. Just remember, I love you. You personally, if you go to TakePoliticsSeriously.com. I love you. I like you if you're just listening. And that's great. We can like each other. We're friends. But if you go to TakePoliticsSeriously.com and you support, oh boy, do I love you. Let's get into the stories that we didn't have a chance to go over. Good news for Republicans from Gallup. Gallup, a very well-respected pollster, survey taker. They have the following to say. The 2024 political landscape, as assessed, favors the Republican Party across several key indicators. Republicans have a slight edge in party identification, with 48% of Americans identifying or leaning Republican compared to only 45% for Democrats. Furthermore, the GOP is perceived as better equipped to handle pressing national issues, including the economy, immigration, and inflation. Historically, the party that is perceived as more capable in these areas tends to win elections. On economic confidence, Gallup's index shows negative sentiment, which aligns more with the losing of an incumbent party. Republicans also hold a significant lead in national security concerns, another critical factor in previous election outcomes. Now, while the favorability ratings of the parties are similar, President Biden's approval ratings are low. Voter dissatisfaction with the state of the nation and the economy presents a challenging environment for Democrats. Therefore, the race is Donald Trump's to lose, according to Gallup. Now, here's what's interesting about it. When you look at 48% with a 3-point difference between identifying and leaning Republican versus Democrat, that is the highest that number has been in modern history. It was tied the last time that the Republicans won the popular vote, which was 2004. That's the good news. Now, I don't know why that wouldn't translate into better polling for people that aren't Donald Trump. It doesn't mean Donald Trump's going to win, but if you are looking at key fundamentals that go beyond what the mechanics of a campaign are, right? So this is more the landscape than how good you're driving. Voter registration and stuff like this, to me, is what you got to look at. But of course, there's a lot that goes into the world of Donald Trump, including this. Special Counsel Jack Smith has submitted a detailed compilation of evidence against Donald Trump, accusing him of trying to overturn the 2020 election. The evidence was provided to U.S. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkin as part of a sealed filing. Smith's office complied with the court order, preparing up to 180 pages of said evidence. Trump's lawyers argue that the move interferes with the election, but Chutkin dismissed these claims, asserting that political timing would not affect her decision-making. The evidence is tied to Trump's appeal for immunity, and Chutkin will decide whether or not to release it publicly. As you might imagine, this is the kind of thing that is a little October surprisey, right? And you're like, oh, if this were to be released October 15th, it would probably be talked about quite a bit. So keep that one in the back of your old noggin. And now a crazy story. This is something that has been around in media circles, that what national intelligence officials say is an Iranian hacker by the name of Robert has been sending a dossier for J.D. Vance, apparently along with one for Doug Burgum and Marco Rubio, that was compiled when Donald Trump was assessing who he wanted to pick as his vice presidential nominee. That dossier has been sent to a lot of different news agencies. And today, it was published by Ken Klippenstein on his Substack. It is still available there. I have downloaded it. I skimmed through it. I have not read it all. It is very much the exhaustive kind of oppo research that you do, compiling everything that could possibly be a liability for J.D. Vance. And obviously the top line stuff there is his Never Trump past, which was known, his record of non-interventionalism with Ukraine and Russia, as well as various different things with his past in Silicon Valley and a nonprofit he started in Ohio, the one that you heard about in our debate prep, because Tim Ryan brought it up. Let me just have a little journalism conversation. I'm glad that this was published. I am an absolutist on if it's out and you can verify that it's real, it should be published. I was on the side of BuzzFeed publishing the Steele dossier because I believe it was better to have the Steele dossier out there than have it be whispered and reported and drip, drip, drip through gatekeepers. Because when you read it, you're like, okay, this is ridiculous. This is a very silly document. If this document is real, we live in a crazy world. But I don't know if it is. And I was really, really upset that the Hunter Biden laptop was not published more. I've been consistent on this throughout, and I remain consistent on it now. Twitter, or now X, has delinked the J.D. Vance stuff, which I think is a mistake. I don't think that is consistent with being the marketplace of ideas. And I am glad that Substack, which is where Ken Klippenstein has posted this, has it up. I think that shows guts. I think that shows principle by Substack. Now, maybe they take it down and there'll be a different story. But I am glad Substack exists. And I'm glad that the reporter, Ken Klippenstein, can monetize it. I think it's important to have an outlet like that has a name. I think it's good for the business of journalism. I think it's good for the business of being a writer and a reporter. And I think it's good for them because it establishes that they have a backbone when it comes to this stuff. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go if you want to support this very show. Now let's go ahead and get to our friend, Jeff Maurer. Welcoming back to the show, our old friend, Jeff Maurer. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, man. Fantastic. And it's something that has been on my mind for a little bit about the world of comedy and politics, specifically this cycle, which appears to be maybe the most like Cronenberg combination of something that has been happening for a while. And we've talked about the confluence of very serious politics and what is supposed to be tools of comedy to make us laugh and relieve tension. And the moment that it hit me was Donald Trump did a press conference. This is after Kamala Harris comes in. Kamala Harris's team, obviously a lot younger. They are trying to portray the campaign as a lot more hip. And at the top of their official press release, this is not the YouTube thing. This is not the TikTok thing. This is what goes out to George Will. This is what goes out to everybody in the media, is a drill tweet. And if you are not familiar with drill, then hence is the reason why I wanted to flag this, because it's a very online meme. It is something that just flabbergasted me. And it seems to have only continued. The idea of competent political communication seems to involve the necessity of some level of comedy. Have you noticed this as well, or am I just having a stroke?
No. It's true. Every campaign wants to be hip. Every campaign wants to connect with people. And I remember, so I was a speechwriter for a long time. Not for a candidate. I was a speechwriter for the EPA. But it's similar in that a lot of people want something for free. I mean, they want free publicity. They want virality. And your boss, when you're a speechwriter, and you always, speechwriter, and you're kind of in the communication shop, they're always going, hey, how do we get one of those viral tweets? They're like, hey, I had a great idea this morning. I had a great shower thought. Let's do one of those viral videos. Of course, if people knew how to dial up a viral video whenever you wanted, they'd do it all the time. Yeah. But they're always going for that, and their best shot at that is to try to make something funny, try to make something original. So that's why you see them, constantly chucking these full court shots, hoping that one of them will go in.
And I've noticed it when I was at the RNC, the weird Donald Trump like hammer dance that he does. They've kind of become self-aware with that, which makes it a lot less fun. Like, it was a lot more fun when it was, oh my God, Uncle Donald's doing his weird dance again at the wedding, and everybody looks at it, and it becomes kind of ironically hip. Now it's like they're like he gets up with like the teachers, whatever. I was gonna say the teachers union, but whatever the opposite of the teachers union is, because it's Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're doing the dance together, like for a photo op. There's no room for there to be a divide to say something is ironic anymore. It feels like.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to be in on it.
I think that's true. Well, that might be a move of last resort. I mean, I can imagine the way that might have gone is that, you're on the Trump campaign. He's doing that dance. I don't know what I'm allowed to say on this podcast, but so you can cut this out if you need to. I've seen a version of that where somebody photoshops two dicks in, then he's jerking off dicks. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So even if that had happened, you still might have cause to go to Trump and say, hey, can you stop doing that? And then he does it the next night. And then, 2 days later, you go to, could you stop doing that? People kind of noticed. And then you do that 12 times. Is there any way you can stop doing that? And then you realize he can't stop doing that. So he's not going to stop, which is very Trump. He just, has momentum. He has things he does. He doesn't think about any of it. He just does what he does.
And if somebody's talking about it, he'll do it more. Like that is kind of the immutable rule of publicity for which he follows.
It's a little bit like a child acting out. Like, as long as they're getting attention, any attention is good attention.
Yes.
So at some point you have to accept he's not going to stop doing it. Given that situation, maybe your best option is to just try to own it.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know if something broke after the coconut tree stuff, because I feel like the coconut tree stuff was this weird and in its own way extraordinarily authentic meme that boils up on the anti-Kamala left that then became so anti-Biden that they were like, no, we're for the lady that says the weird thing. And so they branded themselves as coconut heads, and we fell out of a coconut tree, and it became Venn diagrams. All these things that had been flagged by Republican opposition as, look how ridiculous Kamala Harris talks, now becomes this badge of honor. And to their credit, it's not like they have leaned into it, at least yet, that Kamala Harris doesn't have fall out of a coconut tree in her stump speech. But I don't know. I feel like that might have been the last moment where there was an ironic thing that was detached that now the candidate leads into.
I mean, you're right. The coconut thing is more something that happened to her.
Yes.
People not connected to the Harris campaign decided this is the emoji we're going to use. Maybe just because there was an emoji, It's like we need some way to put in our Twitter bio.
They can say coconut head. It's quick.
Yeah.
It gets you from here to there.
I don't know about you. I always thought the coconut thing was like fine. I never. There have been some things that get attention in the political world, like Mitt Romney's binders full of women. It's like, okay, that's just kind of an inartful phrasing. I would sort of put coconut tree in the same place.
I've told this story before, but one time at a Texas Tribune event 2 years ago, I met the woman that worked on that project. and
Okay.
was like, it was a very well-intentioned project. It was a project that was there to try to identify and find women and put them into high levels of leadership in business. And so she's watching this debate, and then he says binders full of women, and then she's just watching all of her dreams die on Twitter. Just one tweet after another of like, oh, I guess my entire life is a total sham.
Yeah, and like in both cases, like I get why people responded to it. Like the binders full of women, I guess it was seen as kind of dehumanizing, but in another way, like, but you get what he's saying, right?
Yes.
Like I said, it's sort of an inartful turn of phrase. You fell out of a coconut tree. I guess it's a little goofy. You could argue it's unpresidential. I don't think I would argue that, but again, you get what she's saying, right? It's like things came before you. You understand that, right? Sometimes I think people are just kind of, I know in politics, you're trying to seize on something and go, aha. And those are, in my opinion, two of the lamer examples.
I feel like it's also more than ever now that almost like everything is a meltdown. Everything is a total disaster. There is a hyperbole that I don't know whether I'm sure that this happened probably in every campaign that has had rapid response teams where some opposite candidate does a speech. You pick out a moment that was the worst. You send it out to anybody that cares. Oh my God, can you believe that this awful moment happened? Maybe it's just that with 4K video on social media, it just goes faster than it would have otherwise. But it is, if you're following all of this like I am, and we're in the home stretch of this race, so I am even my iron resolve is starting to grow weary. It is just tiresome after a while to be like, oh God, all right, come on. Like every little clipped edited thing has to be like, can you believe it?
I was just going to say, I think the editing makes a big difference. I think that's one of the reasons it's worse now than it used to be, because you can edit something really tight. Anything sounds, well, not anything, but many things sound silly out of context.
Yeah.
Also something that was maybe kind of bad, maybe a 3 out of 10 on the bad scale, sounds like a 7 out of 10 if you take the qualifiers and context out on either end. And people are so used to seeing an 18-second clip on Twitter or TikTok that they see it and they don't think, oh, this has been edited, I'm being manipulated. It's just normal now.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, so much of that, because Trump talks so much and therefore allows any number of things. Any Donald Trump speech, you can get babbling incoherence if you clip it the right way. You can get something that might sound like the most horrifying authoritarian thing that you have ever heard of, or some reaction to a news story that sounds entirely out of pocket, right? Like, and part of that is just because he talks so much. He doesn't speak on a script. He goes totally stream of consciousness. But also you see it on the left. There's a thing going around this week where Tim Walz at an event was naming off how high prices are and says we can't afford another 4 years of this, which, like, I think he's talking about inflation, right? Probably something that you'd want to reword if you had it back from the speech team, considering that he's running on theoretically the incumbent's ticket. But this is what happens around this time of year.
Yeah. Hopefully a sophisticated media consumer would understand that and be less able to be manipulated. But of course, a sophisticated media consumer, those are probably not the voters who are going to decide this election in the end, right? They mostly know who they're going to vote for at this point.
What is a sophisticated media consumer now? And if you are consuming more than one political, unless you're just a true sicko like I am, where I just really like elections almost more than I like, definitely more than I like politicians.
You do have a disease,
If you are consuming more than one form of political media this cycle, you're probably rooting for somebody, right?
Probably. Very few people are just in it for the love of the game.
Yeah.
That's a small number of people.
And if you're rooting for somebody, then you have a vested interest in promoting these clips, whether or not you look at it and you're like,
Yeah, well, like in 2012, I was an Obama voter. I liked Obama a lot. I didn't have a blog back then. But I wasn't sticking up for Romney and the binders full of women thing. I was just looking at it and thinking, those kind of, but I didn't say anything to anybody.
Let me ask you about this. This is something that's also just been in my head for a while. The idea of the kind of volunteer surrogate that exists on social media, that it's not just one thing to go out and say, oh, well, I like this about this candidate. I'm probably going to vote for him. I support this. I'm not really a big fan of this other thing. But instead, the idea that, like, okay, we are putting on our jerseys. If an account with 37 followers, deviate from the script in any way, I am going to cost my side the election. And therefore, I need to promote everything that comes out there as if you were getting paid. I've always found this to be kind of an embarrassing way to be, but there's no doubt that it is very, very popular now, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I completely agree that I don't really get it. I think for a lot of people, their political identity it's very important to them these days. And you've even seen, social science research showing that political identity is becoming more important as, other identities, racial identity, religious identity, et cetera, are becoming less important. I mean, on the one hand, I'd say that's good. I mean, personally, I think when racial identity becomes less important to you, that's healthy. But it is kind of weird that now, being on the blue team or being on the red team is a big deal to people. And you're right that the way you put it, putting on the jersey. Tim Urban often talks about sports fans in politics, and it's really true. And I guess in much the same way that if you follow a team, and I'm a sports fan, like literally sports, not a sports fan for politics.
Not metaphor. Sports. Yeah.
People feel the need to get online and tweet their opinions about their team, even if they have, like you said, 37 followers. So I guess it's just kind of the same thing in politics. People do it for the same reason.
I will stick up for the sports fan here. Because
the political sports fan?
No. The real sports fan as being more evolved than the metaphorical political sports fan. Because at the very least, anybody who's a sports fan knows that there is a core contingent of the most passionate fans of any team that if you only add up the sum total of what they say online would appear to hate the team more than anybody on earth. Like that is just a core 12% of any sports fandom. There's a great clip of, and sorry for any non-NFL fans that I'm going to bore right now, but just to give you the Cliff Notes version, there was a very popular quarterback for the Cleveland Browns named Baker Mayfield. He was jettisoned off, and they brought in this other guy, Deshaun Watson. He has got a gigantic contract.
Talk about him more.
Yes, exactly. And he's a horrifying person, a terrible, terrible person. He's got these a litany of sexual assault claims against him. Very problematic. But
the Browns stuck by him, and then he got bad. Like, oh, karma. I love it when karma happens.
And so there was this great clip that went around from like a week ago on local Cleveland sports radio. And it's everything that you would imagine local Cleveland sports radio to sound like, it's Doug and the Badger, and they like, okay, all right, the Browns have just lost. All right, let's open the phone lines. Another guy who you would imagine calling in, being the first caller to Cleveland Sports Talk Radio, comes on and just says, I've got two numbers for you, and then reads off a very high number, reads off a very low number, says, this is the quarterback rating for Baker Mayfield, who now is doing very well in Tampa Bay. Here's the quarterback rating for Deshaun Watson. And the host just loses it. He's just like, I'm not doing this. The first call. I'm not doing this. Just the tension, because that man has had to deal with people that are negative about the Cleveland Browns because they love the Browns. They love the Browns so much they hate the Browns. We need to evolve that in politics more. Just people who are like, look, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. I just want to point out all the things that I am mad about what is happening right now, although I hope that she wins the Super Bowl in the way that everybody who's going to call into that Browns line with all the negative things they're going to say about the team and the GM and the offensive coordinator and the coach and the quarterback, they hope that the Browns win the Super Bowl against everything that they think.
I think you may be walking me to an understanding here because you're making a good point about how in sports you are much more likely to tweet, express yourself one way or another, Facebook post, when things are bad. Because you're right.
Yes.
When my team suffers a tough loss, now I don't tweet about sports. It's just like I don't. But I sure as hell see other people doing it. When your team suffers a bad loss, I won't tweet. What I will do is I will get online. I agree. I don't cheer for the same teams as my friends, so not that. But I'll get online to see if other people are mad. I'm a Mariners fan. The other day, Julio Rodriguez got picked off third base in the stupidest possible way. In extra innings, or down by one in the 10th inning. He got picked off a third with nobody out. I guess one out. But I got on. I needed to see that other people were angry about it because I was furious. I just needed validation that other people were angry. And if I was the type of person who would call into sports radio or tweet, I would have done it because you're right. That feeling of anger, it needs to come out. It needs to be expressed. Whereas happiness, if my team's doing well, I don't feel the need to express that. I'll keep that within me. I'll savor it. The anger needs to come out. Maybe that's why so much of political discourse is angry. Because it's a feeling that just needs to come out more than contentment or joy.
It just there does not seem to be a healthy place for people to just be mad about their own team, even if they believe in them, even if they desperately want them to win. It's usually either unrestrained joy, good news, or when you're sad about your own team, you just fire up more anger about the other side. And maybe part of this is that in sports, there's 29 other teams in the league. So unless you're in a fierce rivalry like the Yankees and the Red Sox or something like that, then it's hard to be diametric about, well, at least your team sucks. And by the way, you haven't done X, Y, or Z.
That's right.
It's just more diffuse.
It is diffuse. And also, I can't make the Mariners better just by tearing the Astros down, though I would love to do that. And I do tear the Astros down, and they deserve it. But if I do that, that's only one team of the 29. So that's not really going to work. In politics, it is binary. If you can't find something good to say about your candidate, you can at least find something bad to say about the other candidate.
But I guess also, do we? What is the value? The value of a random person on Twitter saying a mean thing about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris right now? Zero. Right?
Zero.
It's zero.
But they're probably not doing it to influence the election. They're doing it to blow off steam. Or let me throw another thing out there.
Let's throw another thing.
Gain social status within their group.
There we go.
Everyone I hang out with is a big liberal, and except for Andrew Heaton. And
you can't label him. Now he's going to spend the next 30 minutes explaining why he's more like the thing you think as opposed to the other thing.
But I just said not a liberal. I didn't try
I know, but
pin a label on him because
he's a fragile boy.
and he is slippery when it comes to labels, to say the least. But aside from, most of my friends are big liberals. And this is not really actually the type of people we are, but it's very easy to understand how you could, gain status within the group by some stupid tweet. I don't know how anyone could vote for Trump. It's like, yeah, we've had a decade of this now. but some people still do it. People still do it.
But it's like it's kind of like reciting from the hymnal, right? This is our Station of the Cross. That totally. now we say, okay, unelectable though is he, January 6th.
Yeah.
But also I think it might be fear, right? Because the fear is if you say, hey, I don't know why Kamala's run to the right, then it's the answer to that is usually, so what, you're going to vote for Trump? And that's more of a fear. If we are looking at it from the social dynamic point of view.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
And I guess we saw the most of this with Biden. But Biden was the real litmus test with that, because there was obviously gigantic problems with Biden to the point where he's no longer in this race. But there was a period of time where to express that, hey, maybe he really did aimlessly wander off during the G8 summit when it wasn't a maliciously edited video like the White House suggested, was tantamount to backing Donald Trump, that you were on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, the Biden thing. And I will say that video, if you're talking about the one I'm thinking of, that was edited, where he was talking to the parachute guy. There's a different one where he's on stage with Obama and he's kind of
those were both of them. I think it was more it was more a time and place situational awareness, whether or not it was the worst thing. I don't think that video was necessarily per se the worst thing on the planet. It's more where it came from in the period, and also it was Giorgia Meloni directing him in both of those videos. It was other people directing him to where he needed to be. That was ultimately, I think, the most harmful element of it.
They did, and I will say, I was a person who, after the debate, was immediately, he's got to go. I was team, he's got to go hard. But that video, they did feel the need to edit out the parachute guy. I think if you're an honest broker, that's not something you do. If the video is damning on its own, you don't edit out the parachute guy. Anyway, we're litigating old stuff. The Biden thing was definitely a moment where you kind of there was a clear cleavage between people who were going to toe the party line no matter what and people who were not. I felt that most of the people who were on Team Biden and would repeat the, in my opinion, absolutely ridiculous, he just had a cold line. I don't use the word Orwellian often, but that was Orwellian when you're saying he just had a cold. I've had colds.
Yes.
That's not what happens to you. But they clearly felt that if they didn't toe the party line, they were somehow throwing the election to Trump. So actually, it was, I'm very glad that we switched given that scenario. The better option would have been to not be in that scenario in the first place, but that's on Joe Biden. He didn't drop out when he should have. And I don't mean it was hard to push him out. I mean, he should have said in 2022, I'm a one-termer. But water under the bridge, that was a moment when we kind of figured out who was willing to acknowledge the plain fact in front of our faces and who was deciding, no, I need to be a good fan of my team at this moment.
Yeah. God, I always love the post-mortem campaign books that come out, and this is a cycle that I am probably the most excited, because I think there's a lot of stuff that, number one, we've just moved so fast with all of this that even that moment, I would love to spend a lot more time of people's recollection and the original reporting in the moment, now that it's already done, of the defense of Biden, the cheap fakes era, not to mention what comes afterward, where after the debate, whatever screws were turned that made him understand I need to step down. I don't think he did it from, just totally open mind. There was obviously a campaign that was there to push him out.
Oh, yeah. Nancy Pelosi said we can either do this the easy way or the hard way.
The hard way.
But we're doing it.
Why those screws weren't turned earlier, like around the primary,
Yeah.
And,
that's a really good
I would
question.
love to know it.
There was a very good Politico interview recently with, hang on, I'm trying to look this up because I forget the advisor's name. There you go. Anita Dunn. Politico interview with Anita Dunn.
Who was one of the pushed out.
Yes, one of the Biden people. And I think she provided some answers to some questions. And the answers were, if I may paraphrase, go read the Politico interview yourself. But I would say the answer was, we are idiots who were in denial. I don't know. Just like, she's like, we didn't know it was a problem. I thought at one point they asked her, okay, was it strategy to have the debate much earlier than you normally have the debates? They normally happen in September, October. We're going to do this one in June. Was that strategy so that if he bombed, there was still time to replace him? Now, there's actually a self-serving reason to answer that question with a yes. You can go, yes, you know what? We were geniuses who were playing eight-dimensional chess, and we knew we needed that contingency, and indeed we did. We knew we might need it, and we did. But she says, nope, we thought he was going to kill it. So it's like, I don't know what to say to that. You didn't notice that he had these very obvious problems, and she is still like, she's of the opinion that, like, it was one bad night, and he's fine. It's like, he's not fine. No. I've seen him since then. He's not fine. But I don't know. I've had elderly relatives who decline, and I've had these debates with family members who are just sort of, I think he's okay, and he's not.
I mean, the thing that really struck me is when I was doing debate prep for the early debate, the disastrous one, I was going back and watching, old debates of his. And so you go back to the vice presidential debate with Paul Ryan. And obviously there's a big gap between where he was,
huge,
even before that debate. And
even 2020.
But that's the one that shocked me. The one that shocked me was 2020. As I went back to 2020, I'm like, holy moly, he is like on a different wave. Like he's like 50% slower than he was then, less than 4 years ago, which it makes sense. It's the most stressful job in the world. He's in his 80s. What do you want?
Yeah, I know. It became undeniable after the debate. I mean, clearly the campaign didn't plan it, but if they had planned it, at least there was time to replace him because it was undeniable after the debate.
I really do. Those were maybe my favorite 3 weeks of the campaign, though, mostly because it was the first. It was
because you just like the. The struggle of it all.
No,
right?
Yes, I do. Yes, that's true. Right. I will take all of my vampiric desires. I will admit to them. But also everybody was honest. It was like the only time in this campaign where you turned on CNN and David Axelrod is like, yeah, that's terrible. He did a really bad job and he really does need to leave. And it was like, and then you go to the Republican. Yeah, that was terrible. He did a really bad job and he really needed to leave. And it's like, hey, I think Trump did a bad job too. Yeah, he really didn't do good either. And it's like, wow, it's actually the conversation you guys are having backstage. But now it's in front of the camera. This is amazing. This is so much better than the bumper sticker slap fight that happens all the time.
I would say it was so bad that it was undeniable, which is a barrier that is not often cleared in politics. If something is not undeniable, somebody will deny it. But that was undeniable. I remember that night waiting for the debate to end so I could see if the people you're talking about, David Axelrod and Van Jones, everybody who you know who they're rooting for, you know who they prefer, but to see if they would admit the obvious thing. Because I wanted to, my perception was, this is a disaster. This man can't do 4 more years. He can't be on the ticket. And I just wanted to see if that perception was shared. But will they say it? And they did. Yeah. And that helped to validate, okay, so I did see what I just saw. It was that bad. Yeah, and it happened, which is also shocking. Again, it's like so much... we had an assassination attempt that nearly blows off a dude's head, a candidate switch that doesn't end up in a brokered convention. So we're never getting it. Every journalist who's ever written there, like, we could have a brokered convention this year, never going to happen. If it didn't happen this year, it's never going to happen. It's never, ever, ever going to happen. But then, this roller coaster that we're on now, so I guess we'll leave it here. How do you see the race with, 4 weeks and change to go? 5 weeks to go? Well, I think obviously it's going to be very close. So little moves in presidential races these days. Most people know who they're voting for, and the number of undecided voters is very small. The undecided voters still decide it because it's just that close. I'd give it to Harris. I think Harris is going to win. Actually, if you ask me who's going to win the popular vote, I'm more confident. I'd say maybe 80% confident that Harris is going to win. The popular vote, but that translates into maybe 60% confidence that she's going to win the Electoral College. And I guess I should say there should be a third round after that. Okay, if she wins the Electoral College, what are the odds that she actually takes office? because Trump is going to do some shit after the fact. That I'm 100% about. If Trump loses,
does some stuff, yeah.
He will not concede. He has never conceded any election. People forget in the 2016 primary, whenever he would lose to Ted Cruz or whoever, he would say, "Oh, it was rigged," and it ultimately it wasn't worth it to contest it.
He actually did concede to Ted Cruz in Iowa, but I don't know.
Did he? I don't think he did.
The first one, 2016, he did. Yeah, I was there.
Okay.
He did there, but I don't.
I stand by my prediction that there is 100% probability that he will not concede this election.
I totally agree with you there. I don't think he is not going to concede this election. 100%. No, absolutely. He will not. He will not do that. All right. Jeff Maurer, of course, you are now the author of a very, very successful Substack, as you have always written, but now it is very, very successful. Tell people all about it.
It's I might be wrong.substack.com. You're right that I've had it for a few years, but it was just a side project for a few years. And the last year, it became my main gig, and it's doing well. It's working. I can't believe it, but it's become a career. And it's comedy and politics. I wrote for John Oliver for a long time, for people who don't know. So this is kind of that type of thing, that political comedy. I mean, I'm my own person. John's his own person. It's my views, not John's.
Put the rumors to bed. They are not the same person. Yeah.
There has been I'm an Obama liberal, and he's kind of different. But it's political comedy. I might be wrong.substack.com.
It is excellent. Jeff is a fantastic writer, so go ahead and subscribe to that. Thanks you so much for coming by, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. A big thank you to Jeff Maurer for coming on. If you want to email me anything, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Follow us on TikTok, Justin R. Young, Instagram, Justin R. Young, X, Justin R. Young, where we post clips of the show. If you want to see a video version of this, you head on over to youtube.com/politics. That is where, or at politics technically, but we have video version. Everything that we do now, video version as well. You can get links to the audio version, px3podcast.com. You can also support us with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3 Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. P.O. Box 153184, Austin, Texas, 78715. Of course, you can always get our bonus content at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 tier gets you 2 bonus podcasts per week covering all the news that we miss on our free podcasting schedule, and our $10 tier gets your name read at the end of the podcast like these fine folks in the Titanic. $10 tier, including Edwin, Invoke Gloria Young for King of the New World Order, Mike Edison, a dog named Checkers, Jeremy, Sarah Jeannie, Matthew, Phil, Dr. G, His Nerdiness Charles, Neil, Darren, Idris Arslanian, Berkeley Stephen, Chad, Zombie Doc, Matt P, Chill, Sean, song notes by David Potts, Nicholas, Sparky from Stevens, Florida, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Michael J. Brown, Devon, the CFP, The Barge B, Will Porta, Gloria, Gray Zone, Peepaw, Robert, J. Van Ord, Marcus with the Q, DP4 Bongo, Sam, John, Niemeister, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, Paul, Adam, Dr. Whiskey, Dustin, D. Laser, Nick, Joe, Middle-Aged Mike, Utah Jimmy Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Really, Craig, and Andrew. If you would like your name read on the show, one place to go, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Our next episode will be in October. You have no idea what's going to happen in October. Spooky season is here. And I guarantee that we're going to see an October surprise. You might even see one from this very show. Till next time, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying Some shows cover politics. Others talk about politics. Still more, they're chopping up politics. But this is the only program that dares discuss all three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.